morning to the Americas. Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. My name is Juan Francisco Soto, and I am pleased to welcome you all to the presentation of the report called Accountability Now, Extrajudicial Executions and Repression in Nicaragua, prepared by the International Federation for Human Rights, FIDH, and the Nicaraguan Center for Human Rights. But before we begin, we would like to clarify that the event will be in Spanish with simultaneous interpretation into English. If you need interpretation, you should click on the interpretation button at the bottom of the screen on the right-hand side, where you can choose the language in which you want to hear the speakers. Let me first make a few announcements in English about the interpretation of the event before we begin.
Interpretation available in English. If you are connected from a desktop, please activate the interpretation option at the bottom of the screen by clicking on the image that resembles a word. If you are joining from your mobile phone, please click at the side where 3 points appear to select the interpretation feature. We will now begin the event. Ahora sí, esperamos que haya podido conectarse las personas.
Okay, thank you very much for waiting. I hope you have been able to switch into the English channel. Thank you very much for this. So this event is organized by the International Federation for Human Rights, FIDH, of which I am Vice President, and the Nicaraguan Center for Human Rights. We extend a special greetings to the delegations of the embassies to the OAS and to the United States, to the representatives of the European Union, as well as to journalists who are here with us. A very special greetings to all the Nicaraguan people who are with us today. FIDH has been working for the defense of all human rights since 1922 and currently federates 192 organizations in 112 countries. CENIDH is a member organization of FIDH and was set up in May 1990 and has been defending and promoting human rights in Nicaragua for more than 30 years. In 2018, the Nicaraguan National Assembly approved the arbitrary cancellation of its legal status and seized its assets. The latest attack by the Ortega Murillo government was the partial destruction of CENIDH's headquarters in Managua and the transformation of its premises in Guijalpa into a health post. Despite these attacks, CENIDH is here. Nicaragua is in a very serious democratic and human rights crisis. Daniel Ortega's government has become an authoritarian regime, closing more and more social spaces for participation and attacking civil society and the population in general. A very important point of this crisis has been the attacks against demonstrators, mostly between April and September 2018, that resulted in the death of 328 people, more than 500 political prisoners, more than 80,000 exiled, and the establishment of a state of terror. CENIDH has been monitoring the human rights situations in Nicaragua for more than 30 years, and in this context, it has been a key actor in collecting testimonies and accompanying the victims of these events. FIDH and CENIDH decided to carry out a process of analysis and systematization of the documentation on the killings, as well as monitoring the human rights situation in Nicaragua in 2019 and 2020. This is the research that we present today. The published report is a result of joint work between FIDH and CENIDH, including 3 missions carried out in August and October 2019 and in February 2020. As for the methodology, we can say that's taken into account 113 cases from the 328 people killed in the context of the repression. The FIDH and CENIDH work team defined a methodology for analyzing information based on the analysis of the context. that is to say the facts surrounding each of the deaths, the evidence or proof, and the national and international legal framework in order to establish the legal qualification that each of the deaths would have. As sources of information, in addition to the documentation of cases carried out by CENIDH, the work team systematized information available in open sources linked to the context and the operations deployed by state and para-state agents. All of this was done through the construction of a database. At the same time, the team obtained information on the facts linked to the deaths of the 113 people through meetings, interviews, and workshops held with surviving victims and key people in the 3 missions mentioned above. In February 2020, I had the honor to be in charge of the mission and to observe in detail the serious human rights violations, as well as to listen closely to the testimony of the victims of the repression. Before leaving Nicaragua at the airport, I was actually threatened by the Nicaraguan authorities, and I was forbidden to return to the country, to Nicaragua. Beyond this incident, my visit to Nicaragua was a timely experience to see firsthand the tireless work of Vilma and the CENIDH team, who, despite the limitations and arbitrary actions of the authorities, continue to promote and defend the rights of Nicaraguans. We are joined in this webinar by 4 people, but before introducing them, we would like to share with you that today at 10:30 Nicaragua time, we will launch a small campaign of solidarity with Nicaragua. We would like to ask you to express this solidarity through the social networks by sharing the video that we will show below, which is translated into French and English, and the post that we will disseminate every day until the 16th of February. And again, when we get closer to vote on the resolution before the United Nations Human Rights Council on Nicaragua. We invite you then to support us in its dissemination by using the hashtag SOS Nicaragua. But without further ado, I will propose that we watch the video. Situated at the heart of Central America, Nicaragua has since we cannot have the sound, sorry, we don't have the sound. We could probably rewind and start again, sorry for this. Now, it is working now. Very good. Situated in the heart of Central America, Nicaragua has since 2018 been experiencing a major political crisis. The Ortega Murillo presidential clan, in power for 15 years, stands accused today of serious human rights violations and of crimes against humanity. The situation is explosive and the country is gradually plunging into a dictatorship. To understand how we have reached this point, let's take a look back. In 1984, Daniel Ortega, member of the FSNL, the Sandinista National Liberation Front, won the election for the first time. But we are in the Cold War, and the opposition to the FSLN is calling for a boycott, supported by the United States, that fears the emergence of a communist country. The result? An embargo and civil war with the Contras, an armed opposition movement trained by the CIA, will bleed the country's economy dry, and 30,000 lives will be lost. In 1990, Violeta Chamorro, member of the National Union of the Opposition, beats Daniel Ortega in the elections. She opens the country up to a free market economy, causing significant social regression. In 1996, Daniel Ortega loses the elections once again. this time to Arnoldo Aleman, a former high-ranking civil servant of the Somoza family. Yet he makes a pact to share power with Aleman and overhauls the constitution and laws. This maneuver enables Ortega to be re-elected with few votes and indefinitely. During this period, he is accused of corruption, forming an alliance with the political opposition, contacting terrorists, and raping his adopted daughter. In spite of this, Ortega is once again re-elected president 10 years later in 2006 with an ambitious social program: free education and health care, reducing infant mortality, and building roads. He is re-elected in 2011 and again in 2016, accompanied by his very controversial spouse, Rosario Murillo, who is elected Vice President of the Republic. The two of them will set up an increasingly autocratic regime, concentrating all of the state's powers in their hands. In April 2018, yet another reform of Social Security is conducted to reduce public debt, all on the backs of employees and retirees, who decide to take to the streets and are joined by students. The demonstrations are violently repressed. And very quickly, in the face of such repression, the event becomes the starting point for the protest movement against Ortega's government. The president is accused of abusing power, having distorted the Sandinista revolution, silencing any political opposition, and having enriched himself illegally. The result, 328 deaths, over 2,000 injured, and hundreds arrested for terrorism or sedition. Over 80,000 people are forced to flee the country. Ortega's government establishes a repression that plunges Nicaragua into a profound crisis, where human rights are increasingly flouted. Extrajudicial executions, incarceration for political reasons, and arrests for peacefully demonstrating. CENIDH, as well as 8 other NGOs, are stripped of their legal status and accused by the Ortega government of financing an attempted coup d'etat. Many human rights defenders and journalists, after several aggressive attacks organized by the country's military and paramilitary forces, are also forced into exile. Despite multiple alerts from national organizations and the international community, Nicaragua is sinking into a dictatorship, fear, and terror. The documentation work carried out by FIDH and CENIDH in Nicaragua in recent months paints a picture of regular and sustained attacks on any person considered to be opposition to the regime. Today, a part of the country continues to resist. Several human rights defenders and journalists are still working in the country in spite of the situation. But the population is finding it increasingly harder to express itself, and international support is waning. To put a stop to this situation, the international community must speak out. FIDH and CENIDH are keeping up the fight for respect for human rights, political prisoners freed, and for victims to see justice done. The country must not ever continue further down the path toward becoming a totalitarian dictatorship. Nicaragua must be heard. Thank you so much for the presentation of this video. And as we were saying, we invite you to support us in the dissemination of this video. In this webinar, we are joined by 4 people: Dr. Vilma Núñez, President and founder of CENIDH, and Jimena Reyes, FIDH Director for the Americas, who will present the findings and conclusions of the report called Accountability Now, Extrajudicial Executions and Repression in Nicaragua. We will also have the presence of Francis Valdivia, President of the Association of Mothers of April, AMA, Association of Mothers and Relatives of those killed by state repression in Nicaragua. Finally, through a video, we will have the words of Antonia Urrejola, Commissioner and Rapporteur for Nicaragua of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. We invite you to submit your questions in writing in the questions and answers section. You will write whatever doubt or any questions so that you will get answer at the end of the presentations. So without further ado, let's start with the presentation of the report. To start with, Dr. Vilma Núñez, founder and president of CENIDH, an organization with more than 30 years of work in the promotion and defense of human rights. She's a lawyer specializing in criminal law and human rights. For 10 years, she was vice president of the International Federation of Human Rights, the FIDH. She was the first woman vice president of the Supreme Court of Justice of Nicaragua from 20th of July 1979 to 3rd of September 1987. She has also published many studies and essays on legal issues, justice, human rights, women's human rights, and human rights defenders. Vilma, we give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Francisco. I would like to give a warm welcome to everyone. In my presentation, I will be presenting the main legal elements and the patterns that we found during the analysis of the facts that enables us to establish that the deaths that occurred during the repressive period in April 2018 are extrajudicial executions and crimes against humanity under international law. As the GIEI pointed out, the attacks and demonstrations and are repetitive patterns where state actors and parastatal actors undertook organized attacks on a major scale and generalized attacks in many places and regions throughout the country against the civilian population, and made this in a premeditated manner. These deaths, as well as related crimes described in this report, are crimes against humanity, regardless of whether the victims were demonstrators or passers-by. The Inter-American Court of Human Rights has established that given the violations of the right to life by state agents or parastatal agents, arises the obligation for the state to undertake a serious and effective investigation without forcing the family to instigate an investigation. The investigation has to be undertaken with due diligence in line with the guidelines established in the UN Manual on the investigation of for legal investigations of extrajudicial execution, arbitrary executions, and summary executions of Minnesota Protocol. The state of Nicaragua has done none of this. The 113 cases that we analyzed that now us to establish that the following. In the first period, at the 18th of April to the 23rd of September, 33 persons died of the 113 persons that were executed as a result of attacks during demonstrations, 27 in attacks at places where there were barriers, and 32 in attacks, in targeted attacks, and 15 in indiscriminate attacks. The second period, it's after the one that starts on the 24th of September, we pointed that there were attacks by operatives that were specifically aiming at political opponents, persons in detention and their families, and human rights defenders. On the basis of what we just described, we believe that the state agents acted by following a plan specifically designed to control and neutralize and eliminate persons who are opposing the regime, and that through the generation of a generalized state of fear, which is maintained through today. The patterns that we found in these executions were the following. First of all, citizens were defined as internal enemies. So in addition to political activists, there was a broad segments of the population that were not activists or had no political affiliation that were called as or self-organized. This includes students who question the leaders of student institutions, also journalists, the healthcare staff that provided care to demonstrators that had been hurt, as well as persons who were members of states, defenders, and human rights organizations. These crimes were committed subsequent to the words of Rosario Murillo to Sandinista militants and public civil servants who called these persons promoters of hate and empire. The demonstrators were saying that what these public servants and activists were doing, or members of the government, were promoting hate and disturbing the peace in the country. The government, it was very clear to the government the reasons why people were protesting and the reasons they were calling for reform. But despite that, the government continued, and under Daniel Ortega. The other pattern was characterized by the age of the victims. Most of these were young people who were still going to school. 73 of the 113 persons that we looked into were young people. The third pattern pointed to the generalized and systematic manner in which the extrajudicial executions took place during the demonstrations. As of the 18th of April, members of the National Police, as well as members of paramilitary groups, repeatedly moved in vehicles that belonged to government institutions and attacked whoever was participating in demonstrations. The demonstrators were systematically encircled so that they could be easily attacked. In various places, the use of firearms drew us back into a war scenario with the objective of generating fear. And this was described, in fact, by one of the leaders of the police structures. We did this, we rounded them up so that they couldn't escape, and we attacked them on all sides. The use of force that was undertaken were done without knowledge of, in fact, national instruments for the protection of human rights. This panorama was worsened because persons who were hurt were not allowed to receive medical attention in hospitals or clinics. The bodies of the assassinated persons were returned without any diagnosis. Families were obliged to sign a letter so that their bodies could be transported for an autopsies. Police delegations and members of the family were also obliged to find a letter saying that they would not present any complaints. We, the CENIDH organization, has proof of this. As for the barricades, there were various attacks that were carried out against the demonstrators, which obliged them to remove the barricades that were put up on the public streets. The Ramon Avellan, the commissioner and subdirector of the National Police, publicly gave an order to remove the barricades, and then they started their cleaning up operation that was done with the arming. According to testimony from various experts that we interviewed during our investigation and following confirmation of the Vice President of the Supreme Court of Justice in Nicaragua, Rafael Solis, he, in his letter of resignation, according to our investigation, 78% of the executions that were committed during this period were committed on day 2, 6, 12, and 14 and 18 of June. This, in fact, shows just how violent the attacks were aimed at and why they decided to remove the barricades at whatever cost. This cost was very high for President Ortega. The families of the victims have not for victims, and justice will prevail. Our investigation is making a small contribution in the fight for truth, justice, reparation, and non-recurrence. We still have a lot to do, but we want to continue our work. We want to continue our work until we reach these objectives. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Vilma, por tu tan clara.
Thank you very much, Vilma, for your very clear presentation of what occurred during this very recent period in our history. We're now going to continue with Jimena Reyes, who is the director for the Americas of the FIDH, and that's since 2013. She's a member of the Paris Bar. She has undertaken investigations for human rights violations in many countries in Latin America. She's also pleaded before the Inter-American Court and before the ICC. She has a diploma from King College and from the European College. She was a visiting professional before the ICC in 2016 and 2018. She was also a visiting fellow at the Harvard Law School. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pancho. Thank you to everyone. We're going to continue with the presentation of our study. Between April and September 2018, 328 persons died. In fact, they didn't die. They were murdered. As Dr. Nunez pointed out, we analyzed 113 of the 328 cases, and we concluded that we were dealing with extrajudicial executions, crimes against humanity. Who killed these 113 young people? Who gave the order to have them killed? Which structures and what type of organization existed that lead us to use the term crimes against humanity? Most of these crimes, despite their severity and the fact that they're crimes against humanity, remain unpunished. Today, we want to present further information on all of this. Our report also shows that the same structures are acting, the same structure that today are acting 2021 are the same ones that killed these 113 people. Those structures that today are terrorizing civil society, journalists, representatives of the Catholic Church, any political opposition. And we're going to also talk about the legislation that was voted in at the end of the year. We're going to start talking about the structures and the profile of the perpetrators of these deaths. As Dr. Nunez pointed out, we're not dealing with just simple murders. We're dealing with planned and organized executions carried out by three structures: the police, and in certain cases, the healthcare system. It is within these institutions that we find the intellectual creators of these crimes, or organizers of these crimes. Among one of those institutions, we have Daniel Ortega, Oscar Salvador Mojica Obregón, who was the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure since 18th of August 2017, Robert Jose Lopez Gomez, Director of the INSS, and the Minister of Youth. These persons contributed to these acts, either by acting or through omission, to these executions for persons considered enemies of the state. As for the national police, this was in fact the most visible structure during the carrying out of these plans and strategies to execute the demonstrators. Since 2014, the police is directly under the President of the Republic. Furthermore, the President of the Republic is the chief of the institution and has all responsibilities for their operation. We have Normita Elena Sacasa, Director of the National Police, Francisco Javier Diaz Madriz, Director of the Police since 2018, Ramón Antonio Avellán Medal, Juan Antonio Valle, and Adolfo Joel Correa, who's the General Commissioner. These are persons who have different responsibilities within the National Police. We also have a testimony that details the how the executions were committed. Let me quickly talk about the health system. We know that order was given to not provide assistance to demonstrators who had been hurt, and this led to their deaths. Given this, we believe it is important to also identify the persons who gave these orders and the persons within the management of the hospitals who denied health care to the wounded persons. Among the responsible figures, there's Mrs. Sonia Castro Gonzalez, Minister of Health since the 26th of July 2019, and today works for the President of the Republic on health issues. Mrs. Castro Gonzalez was also involved in a process of persecution and also had the doctors dismissed and other healthcare professionals for not following orders. And then we have the ones who actually killed the persons, the 113 persons. In our investigation, we established that 28 of these persons were executed by agents of the state. 33 of these persons were executed by paramilitary groups, and the majority, 45 of them, were executed by both, either state agents and paramilitary agents. I'd like to now talk a bit about these groups. In our report, we intend to point to the activities of these paramilitary groups and the consequences of their existence. Since the beginning of the government of Daniel Ortega in 2007, as parallel structures started to appear, working with the state and involved in intimidation and repression. Some of these structures have gained legal recognition, such as the volunteer police organizations. Others are part of the FSLN group. Instead of dismantling these organizations in 2018, they were broadened and called the Council for the Defenders of the Country, and given a name, Comandante Camilo Ortega Sabreda, CODEPAT. There are other 8 groups that have no legal entities, such as militias, gangs, attack groups, blue shirts. Some of the persons at the head of these institutions are civil servants or have public positions. Among the mechanisms that were used to recruit the members of these groups, we have the programs that are led by by the Department of Young People Affairs of the National Police, which are aimed at young members of gangs and young persons in risk situations, and also involves people working for the telecommunications and posts, the Ministry of Youth. And we also, they are also working in neighborhoods. They were all involved in the assassinations that took place, the 326 assassinations. The people and the demonstrators, in fact, were called terrorists or enemies of the state. These persons have contributed to the consolidation, leadership, or coordination of the structures that were used to attack and murder persons considered to be enemies of the state. Among them, Mrs. Rosario Murillo, Vice President of the Republic, Mr. Gustavo Porras Corta, President of the National Assembly, Fidel Antonio Moreno, Secretary General of the Town Hall of Managua, and others. Since 2018, what has happened? What has the state done to investigate this? Nothing. We're in a state of impunity. And the paradox is that there have been the arbitrary detention of 100 political prisoners, and persons have been brought before the courts, young demonstrators, and sentenced to more than 90 years in prison. The second point I'd like to point to now is that in 2019 and 2020, we have a continuum of repression against these supposed enemies. The objective is to get rid of all of these spaces where people are able to criticize the government, the press, civil society, young people, or not affiliated to FSLN, the Catholic Church, any form of political opposition. In 2019 and 2020, there were another strategy was express kidnappings. These were arbitrary detention undertaken by either armed civilians or members of the police. And this happened during the last quarter of 2019. There were also verbal attacks and physical attacks. People who are victims of arbitrary detention, who were subsequently freed, still continue to suffer from persecution and threats. From January through September of 2020, the government freed more than 6,000 persons. However, the over 100 political prisoners are still in detention and continue to be victims of torture, cruel punishment, cruel, inhumane, and degrading punishment. And with the following, I will conclude. With the repression in 2021, we had the arrival of a whole package of legislation that were approved in 2020 that sought to restrict social space, and particular to affect the work conducted by NGOs and persons defending human rights. And it also created obstacles for any political opposition to take and for participation in elections in November 2021. What we're asking is to act against the law that forces anybody receiving funds from abroad to be registered. They also, organizations, private parties, political parties must register where the funds come from. They also have to present monthly expense records. organizations that are attempting to be registered as official organizations have been unable to do this. This law and its provisions are an obstacle to democracy. Another very worrying law is one that aims at prohibiting the publication of false information, but this concept is not defined. Well, we've seen how the government has acted and how they're able to manipulate the information and news that is made public. We have good reason to believe that this law that aims at fighting false information or fake news can be dangerous. I'd also like to point out that for our organizations, the FIDH and the CENIDH, we believe that Nicaragua will not be able to get out of this crisis unless the crimes against humanities are prosecuted. We have to leave this state of impunity. We like to ask, we call on the state and Mr. Ortega that it is important to immediately dismantle the structures that act in a coordinated manner to attack persons that are considered members of the opposition to the regime. We also call for the recognition of the independence of the judicial system. We ask the international community, given the unacceptable position taken by President Daniel Ortega, to avoid international scrutiny, to do everything possible and not have to face his responsibilities. It is urgent that the international community not abandon the Nicaraguan population. We would like to continue in our support to all victims and to persons living in exile. We want to be able to show them that there is truth, that there is justice, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Enough with impunity. Thank you very much, Jimena. It's very important to have the names of these persons who are actually undertake these acts of repression. We talk about the state repression, but this state repression is conducted by persons who are going to have to face courts for the crimes that have been committed. We're now going to continue with our presentations. It is an honor for me to present Francis Valdivia, a lawyer and president of the Association Mothers of April, who is comprised of mothers and family members of persons who have been executed. She is the mother of Franco Valdivia, who was assassinated. Francie, the floor is yours.
Yes, good morning. Good morning to everyone. I am Francis Valdivia Machado, sister of Franco Alexander Valdivia Machado, a university student murdered on the 20th of April 2018 in front of the mayor's office in Esteli. As a sister of university student murdered, as the president of the Association of Mothers of April, we consider that those facts that occurred as from April 2018 is a turning point, because as from that moment there's been an insurrection spirit among the population, and we are in the face of a forceful argument against the regime of Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo for their response of repressing and murdering the first demonstrators. on the 19th or the 20th of April 2018. As the days went by, the list of people killed by the state of Nicaragua through the government and from the official figures of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights through its report called Serious Violations of Human Rights in the Context of Social Process in Nicaragua, where they documented 328 people killed in the period from April the 18th to October the 5th, 2018. In this process, and the pain that we felt as a family and as Nicaraguans, and also as a country, the anger and generalized pain, we decided to organize ourselves and seek other ways of living, of life, which of course left us with the irreparable losses of our murdered relatives in exile, political prisoners, but we continue to seek other ways of life, demanding truth, justice, and democracy at the same time. In this quest on the 27th of September 2018, we, the relatives of murdered people, decided to set up the Mothers of April Association, a collective of relatives of murdered people organized with 6 defined objectives: seek and demand truth, to seek and demand justice, to demand the right to full reparation, to have an effective impact on the construction of memory, to promote, educate, and actively defend human rights. Those demands have been and will continue to be demands that don't have any political nature, but is just demands that will be addressed to any kind of government. Those demands are addressed to the state. All along these 34 months of struggle, resistance, and crisis in Nicaragua, we have been experiencing different phases of repression, typical of a state in crisis, including legal repression that is framed within reforms and the creation of laws that are inclined to protect the state at any cost. This type of legal repression is applied at all times and in any state, whether it's left, center, or right wing, whenever they feel threatened. And we are full of examples of this. And from the most democratic to the most authoritarian states. We have been experiencing those repression all along the way, but we would like to focus only on the role that the judicial power has had in Nicaragua through the Office of the Prosecutors. And we will, in February, we will have 33 months in which we were told that the Office of the Prosecutor was going to lead investigations on each murder. And we have been following all this, and we know that we have enough proof and scientific evidence and all sorts of evidence. Nevertheless, all the files, all the cases have been archived and with no explanation to the families. And 1 year afterwards, they draw a law, the amnesty law. Of course, we as AMA file an appeal for unconstitutionality against the amnesty law. So 34 months after the serious violations of human rights, and we continue with this dictatorship of Daniel Ortega and the different phases, we as relatives, families, we define our position, and we say that as mothers and relatives of murder persons, we consider that our demands are not political, but these demands are addressed to the state of Nicaragua. And we will continue with our justice and truth process, even if we do not have either truth and justice in any case in Nicaragua. In any case, we would like to thank CENIDH and FIDH for all contributions in the for justice. Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias, Francis.
Thank you so much, Francis. Please be assured of all our solidarity of the human rights organizations from Latin America, from Europe, and all the solidarity from the United States, Europe, in that struggle. And as you have said, something that we have learned in history is that sooner or later we reach justice. And this is not going to be possible with your participation, your contribution. More than victims, you are subjects of law, and you have indeed many rights. So let's continue with the last presentation of this webinar. We are going to have the message of Antonia Urrejola Noguera with a video. She's the Commissioner Rapporteur for Nicaragua of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, also Rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples. Commissioner Antonia Urrejola Noguera was elected on the 21st of June 2017 by the OAS General Assembly for a 4-year term that began on the 1st of January 2018 and ends on the 31st of December 2021. She is a lawyer from the University of Chile and a postgraduate degree in human rights and transitional justice. I'll give the floor.
Bien, bueno, en primer lugar, quiero saludar a todos los presentes.
First of all, I'd like to say hello to everyone, a very warm greeting to FIDH and also to the Nicaraguan Center for Human Rights, CENIDH, a very warm greeting to Vilma Núñez. We know of the great work that CENIDH does in Nicaragua, despite all of the obstacles they come across on a daily basis. We saw that their offices were attacked, they were stricken from the records as a legal entity. Their work is a fundamental for justice and for the memory of Nicaragua. I'd also like to say hello to everyone and to all of the Nicaraguans listening to us. I'd like to start by congratulating the FIDH and the CENIDH for the marvelous work they've done. And I'm going to focus my presentation on how we can draw value from this report and contribute to the fight for justice and human rights in Nicaragua. I'd like to point to two fundamental aspects of the enormous value of this report. First of all, I believe that it is the most comprehensive effort made by the civil society to establish the facts in the crisis in Nicaragua. That is to say, the one that started with the repression in 2018. Furthermore, it is a useful tool to make specific advances in truth, in justice, in cases of violation of human rights. I want to confirm that this work, it contributes to the fight for truth. This is a unique by way of the work that has been done. It's not only the case for international and national organization. It is important and valuable for organizations. The work focuses on describing the crisis in Nicaragua, but also takes into account the causes and historical context, refers to the political context as in that since the 90s has established the basis that is necessary. The report also tells us talks about the suffering of the people and how the repressive activities were undertaken without any constitutional support. In fact, the only thing that explains it is the political context. The use of civilian groups that have contributed to the repression can only be understood if we understand how the state contributed to the organization of these activities and how the criminalization of persons was involved and how the impunity continues. It is only possible to understand all of this, as the report points out, if one understands the political context and the political decisions that were taken that led to the context, and the decisions that were taken way before the repression took place. It's important to be able to document all of these acts, as well as the legislation that has contributed to the repression by the highest levels of the state. None of what has happened could be understood without the information analysis provided in the report of the context that led to this. We believe that this report is also the most recent report. It's the most topical. There are other work that has been undertaken that gives us partial analysis, such as crimes committed in rural areas or those crimes committed before 2018. The report looks into the causes of the crisis. The report also gives us a general vision how the crisis has been deployed since 2018, how we can describe the different stages that led to this, and how the state was able to be well organized in what they did. And also enables to understand why the government approved a series of laws before the elections that might contest its activities in any way. The work that the FIDH and the CENIDH are presenting to us is not just an academic or political analysis, it is a concrete contribution to the establishment of the truth, of the collective truth, which is essential to the truth, and that is essential to constitutional justice. And this is what the American system, the Inter-American System of Human Rights has been striving to do. This report enables us to make headway in our fight for truth and human rights. We now have to look to penalties, sanctions. This has enabled these efforts will then become concrete for victims. The fact that they've described as happening since 2018 to truth, to the present, excuse me, the report investigates all of these cases, and this is very beneficial for victims. It's important to have these executions described as crimes against humanity. And this is particularly important given the current human rights violation context in Nicaragua. And this enables us to go further and to go before entities outside of Nicaragua. Not only does the report identify the victims, but also identifies the perpetrators, and that takes us to the highest level of state organizations and describes the mechanisms that were used to undertake the manifestation. The description of these structures, the descriptions of the patterns are very useful. The report along with the other reports that we mentioned, and the identification of 113 persons who were executed. The analysis of these cases is in itself an act of memory and an act of reparation for their families. The identification, registration, and analysis of extrajudicial cases, the fact they've given names to people and put a context on these violations is important. It shows the severity of this repression against human life. This has led to what in our region we call never again. This is an act of memory and reparation for the victims. In summary, this report provides extraordinary support to truth and justice in Nicaragua. Whatever future entity is created for truth and reconciliation in Nicaragua in the future, terribly sorry the interpreter cannot hear the speaker very well because their voice is breaking up, will be able to use the report that is being published today. Thank you very much.
La señora comisionada.
Thank you for the message sent by the Commissioner Orejona Noriega. As she says, it is really important to highlight the contribution of the judicial system so that such violations of human rights are occurring. And unfortunately, this system may be co-opted, as it is the case in many other countries of Latin America. And also highlight the message around the independence of the judicial system. It is really important that all the organizations and all individuals demand this independence of the justice so that all the responsibles of these human rights violations are going to be held accountable for all the crimes they have perpetrated. So we have finished now the presentations of today's meeting, webinar, and we would like to thank you very much to all the speakers. And now we are going to have a Q&A session. As you have already found out, you can ask your questions in the chat. So I have one first question regarding the following. Which are the criminal actions against impunity vis-a-vis the other perpetrators of crimes against humanity? And if Ortega would like to continue and become legitimate vis-a-vis the international community through the elections, I don't know whether one of our speakers would like to give an answer to this question. Yeah, well, I can start, and then Vilma, can you complete the answer? Thank you. Yes. So indeed, in situations like this, and this is also one of the objectives of our report, we need to look for those fora in which we can get international justice. We are facing crimes against humanity, and we can go to use the universal jurisdiction abroad, as it has been the case in other cases like Guatemala, Chile, or Argentina, for instance, in which the fact that there is a crime against humanity, any other court outside Nicaragua can also hear the case. And in the website we have you can find a report in which we use the universal jurisdiction. Nicaragua has not signed yet the Statute of Rome, therefore the International Court does not have the possibility to do anything unless the United Nations Council decides to ask the International Court of Justice to see the case of Nicaragua. And Vilma, please, with your microphone on. Okay, yes. I would like to be more precise about this answer. We definitely, as Nicaraguan, we wouldn't like to wait until we are going to seek for justice at an international level. We, of course, we prefer to have this justice in Nicaragua, and like that this government and this repressive state will come to an end so that we will recover the real judiciary system and we will be really independent, so that the national judiciary system will definitely touch those facts. That's the ideal. And we cannot given the context, we cannot expect that. Now, this is the reason why we are making all our efforts to ask for help to the international justice. And I would like to take advantage of this question to explain the following. It's not enough to register a fact or denounce the fact. We have to have all the proofs, all the evidence, all the documents, all the circumstances, so that we can constitute a real documentation, so that we can constitute a real demand that we could file in an international jurisdiction, for instance. Thank you so much to Vilma. Thank you to Jimena. We have another question. Which is the next step that we have to follow so that this Ortega Murillo dictatorship will be taken before the international justice? I would like to have the word, the floor. Yes. Yes. I think that it is really important to get organized in all possible levels, at all possible levels. Of course, gather documents, gather information, and activate all the inter-American justice courts or different forums and international justice too. As Dr. Vilma was saying, we should recover at a national level our ability to judge crimes. We should set up a commission of the truth and a specific prosecution office when there is going to be different groups. When we stop this group of victims, of course, we would like to define the different periods and define who will be the persons. So very specific points that we have been able to do despite all the repressions that we have been suffering, but that is basically get organized and define all the actions that are going to be carried out. So these 3 points, that is the inter-American system, universal justice, and the national justice, all 3 are linked.
Gracias, Francis.
Jimena, no sé si tú vas a responder o pasamos a la siguiente.
Yo creo que pasemos.
Are you going to respond to that, Jimena? I think we should move on to the next question because it's in fact linked to this one. This next question is, sexual violence has been reported or has have there been cases of sexual violence reported during the repression? In our report, the report we presented today, we only make reference to them, but do not detail these cases. However, we have documented the different investigations and different complaints that have been filed, some of which we have in our possession. We believe that to date, independent of everything else that is going on, the most concrete information we have of everything, these terrible things that have been going on, this torture, because it couldn't be called anything else. We have the trial, this popular trial organized by the Arias Foundation, and they documented 18 very concrete cases of sexual assault or rape that were committed by the agents involved in the repression. There is still a lot of work to do. This work is just the beginning of work that needs to be continued for a long time. It's not enough to deplore. It's not enough to denounce. It's not enough to publish. We have to document all of the cases. It's important to establish evidence, to identify evidence. We have to constantly struggle. We cannot bring any case before any court here or elsewhere. We need, without documenting cases and finding evidence. It really very detailed work. And sometimes when we're doing this work, we feel like re-victimizing the victims. Because we force them to tell their story, to relive what they suffered. And this is a situation that we find ourselves, we who defend human rights find ourselves in very frequently. Thank you very much, Vilma, for your response. We have one last question, and with that, we'll close our session. What can we do to support this effort to obtain justice? Well, that is the very central objective of our investigation. Getting justice in this context of crime. Concretely speaking, if you have been a victim of human rights violations in Nicaragua, you can go and see the CENIDH, and they will help you to file a complaint. Internationally, we have an international legal group that is comprised of judges and lawyers from the world over, and they are involved in international cases. We don't have a case from Nicaragua yet, but as was said earlier, it's important to document the facts. Someone made a comment as to where they can get the report. You can download it from the FIDH website or from the CENIDH website. And you'll have it there in English and in Spanish and in French on the websites. And to conclude and add to what Jimena has just explained, I'd like to point out two things. First of all, in no way should you see this work as work that belongs to the CENIDH or belongs to the FIDH. It is, in fact, work that has been conducted so that it can be used in the best way possible by victims and by any other body or entity that can make a good use of it with a view to access justice. However, I also believe I don't want, in the current context that Nicaragua finds itself in, it's been announced that we've just opened up the electoral cycle this year. I don't want, I want people to know that in our report, victims call for justice, and all solutions have to take into account that there is a debt with all of the family members and with everyone, especially a debt to those who lost their lives because they lost their lives in their struggle for a free Nicaragua. I think we can conclude our presentation without publicly thanking and very sincerely thank the support we've gotten internationally. We have the support that we've received, the International Federation for Human Rights and the FIDH. But I'd also like to thank the International System for Human Rights Protection. That support that goes much more, that goes beyond identifying cases and documenting cases. I would really like to thank the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, the Inter-American System for Human Rights that has put at our service all of the novel mechanisms and innovative mechanisms that they've made available to the victims in Nicaragua. Our thanks are eternal. We know that they are filling their responsibilities as true defenders of human rights. And sometimes they don't feel very comfortable when we give them thanks, but there's nothing else for us to do. I mean, we thank you for fulfilling your responsibilities. I'd also like to point to the determining role, the very important role played by the Human Rights Council and the Commissioner from the UN Human Rights Council. They have been an important vector for communication. They have brought our case to these international bodies. Please don't forget us. Stay by our side. We hope that we will not fail, and we will not fail. We will do as much as we can. However, we need your support. Your support is essential to us. I'd also like to thank everyone who has attended this presentation, this meeting, the 180 persons who've been able to attend. Thank you very much. This is one of the marvels of internet. We're all over the world. There are people in Guatemala. Francisco's in Guatemala. There are people in Nicaragua. So maybe we can hear the person now. Someone was talking, but they could not be heard. No, person cannot be heard. It's already 27 past the hour. I suggest that we're going to close the meeting. Our vice president, in fact, is having technical difficulties. Once again, I'd like to thank the persons who attended, the members of the international community or representatives of international entities who have participated in this event. And I'd also like to send out a message to the people of Nicaragua and the people working in civil society who have to struggle on a daily basis. And we want to send you all of our positive energy. And we're now undertaking this small campaign. We're going to be sharing, circulating this video, which shows our wish for democracy and justice, the desires for democracy and justice of the Nicaraguan people. Francisco has a problem with his microphone. Well, I think we need to close the meeting. Francisco, unfortunately, is unable to reconnect. I'd like to close with a message. And this is my conviction. And this is what I say to the victims, to the people who are fighting. The best way to defend human rights, it's not what NGOs do. It's what victims do. It's what the people who are the holders of these human rights can do. You have these rights. You have to use these rights. You have to continue the struggles. People, in fact, victims are the best defenders of human rights in their countries. Can you hear me now? Thank you very much, Vilma. I'm terribly sorry for having lost my connection for a few minutes. Well, we're now going to be concluding our forum. We'd like to thank everyone who participated, who made a contribution, people from the FIDH and the Nicaraguan Center for Human Rights, CENIDH. We would like you to relay the campaign, circulate the video, SOS Nicaragua, and we also like to remind you that you can download the report from the CENIDH's website and the FIDH's website. We'd like to thank the interpreters, and we'd like to very warmly greet the Nicaraguans who are with us today. It is an honor for us to participate, to contribute in a very minor way to the report and to be providing support to these people who have suffered from serious human rights violations in Nicaragua. And as some of the victims have said, patience is a virtue, and we have to be patient and remain certain that these perpetrators will be brought before justice. This presentation is much more than a presentation of a report. It is a response to the acts of the state. it is a way of showing how NGOs at the people and victims will not be silenced, that we will continue to fight for human rights. And I like to close by saying, a right that is not defended is a right that is lost, which is one of the sayings used by the CENIDH. Thank you to everyone. Good afternoon to everyone. Good evening. Thank you, Francis, for your words, for your testimonials. Thank you.